What's going on, team? Wanted to give you a recap of eXpCon 2024 here in Miami for those who were not able to attend. Some of the main takeaways I've kind of consolidated down, took notes at the event, whether it be, private masterminds that I was invited to on attraction or for production, or the general sessions, which we had some phenomenal speakers. And I've redone those notes and I whittled it down for this conversation to give you really kind of some of the key main takeaways that'll be applicable for you and your business. So the first one is that we're actually in a transaction recession. So the number of transactions we're on track for this year, which is about 3.8 million, is the lowest that it's been in 15 years. We've had 36 months of month over month of declining sales. Right? It's actually worse than it was in 2008. Now, why this is important is it gives us context. So I've had lots of conversations with people in the organization or coaching clients, oftentimes on like a weekly basis, of how difficult, right, it is at the moment. That's because of the context that we're in, the marketplace that we're in at the moment. It's the most difficult time to sell real estate in the last 15 years. And that doesn't mean that we use that as an excuse, but what it certainly does mean is that we can give ourselves a little bit grace, right? It also dictates what's going to be required. I was having a conversation with a young man today, and I asked him a simple question. I'm like, well, he's not producing the outcomes that he wants, and money's becoming a challenge because it requires money to live, right? And so I said, hey, tell me a little bit about how you're spending your money, because that will dictate to me like what you value, and tell me a little bit about how you're spending your time. And what came to the surface was that, a meaningful amount of time and money was being spent perhaps like in bars or hanging out and that sort of thing. And the time, not prospecting on Saturdays, not putting time in, during the weekdays in the evening, looking for opportunities. And if we look at both of those, what I shared with him is I asked him a question. I said, hey, are you optimizing for production or are you optimizing for fun? I'm optimizing for fun. I said, well, I appreciate your honesty. And I guess my question is in an environment where we have the lowest amount of transactions that we had in the last 15 years, does that seem like a realistic expectation that you can optimize for fun and still produce favorable outcomes? And he was like, well, no. And does it also seem like a realistic expectation that in that environment that I can put in kind of an average amount of time and expect to get an unaverage amount of, kind of results, right? So am I praying for an A+ life with C+ effort? And, I brought to the surface as that's what was happening. So logically makes sense. If there's way less transactions in the marketplace, I'm going to have to spend more time finding people that are willing to do something. The second thing that it really kind of proves out is that I need to find sources of business that are market resistant or independent to market conditions. So what we're finding in our organization and with the people that I coach and that are doing lots of volume, $1 million worth of GCI, even in this environment, is that, a few things are working really well. Obviously, one is a niche that is market resistant. The one that I promote and talk about all the time is probate. For me personally, that was 50 to 60% of our business. And it's market resistant. The second largest cohort of individuals are, the population are baby boomers. They're all in their mid 60s. So I think as time progresses, that'll continue to be a really good source, the very high motivation, and statistically 60% of them are free and clear. So high motivation, lots of equity, market resistant. The second one that's working really, really well is cash offers, because what's also happening is we have the highest level of debt for kind of the three musketeers, right? So credit card debt, car debt, auto debt. What'll happen with a high degree of probability moving forward is that the distressed sellers are just going to be people that are having a hard time paying their bills, right? So cash offer, that hook, like, hey, I'll give you money, is an easier, kind of sell than give me money. It makes sense that it's not only working now, but will continue to work for the foreseeable future, next 12, 18 months, something like that, 24 months. So being mindful of effort and being mindful of strategy in an environment where we're in a real estate kind of transaction recession. The second thing I thought was really interesting that I wanted to share with you guys is 20% of all state sales in the United States have been new construction. And that's pretty interesting. And you got to ask yourself a question as to why they've been new construction. Well, builders are very intelligent in terms of moving inventory. They're less emotionally attached than an individual homeowner. So they've been adjusting prices. So if you're out there and you got new construction in your geographic area, it makes sense to start paying attention and putting some time, energy, and effort in that kind of source. And you can do that via media. You can do that. I got a coaching client that does webinars. He blasts it out to his database about, if you're interested in purchasing new construction, I'm going to do a webinar. He had 40 people show up. He's already done it for it. So there's some creative ways that you can cultivate that lead source. The other thing that was interesting with regards to why those new construction sales are 20% of all sales is that the median price of a new construction home is about the same as a resale. So you have basically very close in proximity in terms of pricing. It's just that one's offering 5% concessions that you can buy down the rate with and the other one isn't. So that is informative. That's very helpful. And it's instructive because you can also utilize that to inform your sellers on what it's going to take to get their property moved and who their competition is and what their competition is doing. Right. The third thing that I wrote down here is that the expectation is moving forward, for the next year for 2025, maybe a 10% increase in transaction volume. Again, nobody has a crystal ball. Based on all the data, that seems to make sense. That would put us right around 4 million. That would be the fourth year in a row at about 4 million transactions, which is drastically less than what it was before, right? It was 6 or 7 million. Now we're down to 4 million. That's a drastic reduction in transaction volume. And again, that goes back to, that first point in terms of a transaction recession. I need to be paying attention to effort, and I need to be paying attention to lead sources and what's actually working and what's moving. And I think it also helps mentally to really prepare yourself. I think it's very difficult, let's say, to run a marathon if you don't know that the length of a marathon is 26 miles. Because if you don't know the length, you're going to be basically asking every, mile, like, how many more miles do we have left? Right. So it just prepares yourself mentally, like this is a long-term game, and it helps you to eliminate hoping, that it just gets better. So that way you can focus on what you need to do in order to improve in the current environment, or in order to get your unfair share in the current environment. Because hope it's a beautiful word, but it's a terrible business strategy. Right. So yeah, about the same amount as we did last year. And what I also think is something to take note of is the last time we had transaction volume drop by this amount, it took a long time, over a decade, to get back to the previous high in terms of transaction volume. So I personally believe with a high degree of probability that, fluctuating around that 4 million-ish mark is, going to be the new normal for a while. And again, that can inform effort and that can inform strategy. And the fourth thing I wrote down here is that 12 million people are turning 35 every day. And the largest group in there is in the Hispanic community, right? So within 10 years, they'll be the largest kind of demographic in the United States and the largest purchasing demographic in the United States. So what does that mean? Well, if you're in a state where, there is a large contingent of Hispanics, you're probably, doing business with them on a regular basis. So it doesn't mean that you have to learn Spanish, but it certainly would make sense to have somebody on your team who speaks Spanish, so you can serve that community. It also makes sense to figure out like what that community wants to know about and what they need to know about, and start producing media. So that way, they can find you online, particularly in long form. And it would be in Spanish to help them during that process of trying to be their guide to help them to solve their problems. So, business is really just strategy and people. And I think if you're not careful, you can just rely on past information and never really make a data-driven decision. And I'm ruthlessly attached to the truth. I really don't care where it comes from. And I've learned to make data-driven decisions. So letting the data tell me what strategy makes sense versus what I think makes sense. So, I share that with you in hopes to inform you and equip you. And if you liked this video, be sure to watch the next one.
That's just the price to pay for making a lot of money. I totally reject that. And I'm about to fire you. Why am I paying you? I want to give you a different perspective on financial margin. And so